I want you to close your eyes for a second, assuming you're not driving, obviously, and just like put yourself in a very specific place.
Yeah, definitely keep your eyes on the road if you're behind the wheel.
Right, exactly. But if you can, imagine you're sitting in the gallery of a federal courtroom. It's Oakland, California. The date is August 18th, 2026.
Setting the scene. I like it.
The air conditioning is humming. The room is just, absolutely packed with legal aides, journalists, executives. And you are watching what is undeniably the biggest, most consequential technology trial of the entire decade unfold right in front of you.
Without a doubt.
Because on one side of the aisle, you have this unprecedented, just massive coalition of attorneys general. We're talking about a 29-state multi-district litigation here.
29 states. That's more than half the country.
Right, and it's spearheaded by these heavy hitters, California, Colorado, Kentucky, and New Jersey. You have all these separate sovereign states across the political spectrum pooling their immense resources together into one unified legal juggernaut.
And then on the other side of the aisle.
On the other side, you have Meta, one of the most powerful, well-funded corporate entities in the history of human commerce. And the stakes, they are almost incomprehensible.
$100 billion.
Yeah. Roughly $200 billion in penalties being sought by the plaintiffs. But honestly, beyond the money, they are demanding massive, fundamental, operational overhauls of how Facebook and Instagram actually function at a structural level.
They essentially want to change how the internet operates.
Exactly. They want to change the internet. But here is the twist for today's deep dive, and it's a big one. Instead of evaluating the incredibly complex arguments of this trial using our actual current painfully outdated internet laws.
Which are very outdated.
So outdated. We're going to look at it through a completely different lens. We're going to throw out the U.S. legal code for this deep dive, and instead we're going to use a speculative United Nations-style framework pulled straight from a science fiction story.
Which, I will admit, sounds completely counterintuitive, right? Like, we are talking about a very real $200 billion lawsuit.
Totally.
But the reality is that applying this piece of speculative fiction actually provides a level of clarity and really a structural critique that our existing legal statutes just completely lack right now.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our sources today are a really fascinating mix. On one hand, we have the actual granular legal details of this historic August 2026 multi-district youth safety lawsuit against Meta.
Real-world data.
Right. But we are pairing those trial documents with a brilliant essay that applies something called the Universal Charter on Human Alignment.
Such a great concept.
It is. And if you haven't heard of it, this charter is a fictional document. It was created by the author John Grant in his novelette, 6 Days in May.
Just to give a little context for that, Grant's story takes place in this near-future setting where compounding crises of algorithmic radicalization and artificially generated realities, they basically nearly collapse global infrastructure.
Right, over the course of 6 Days in May. Hence the title.
Exactly. And the charter in the story is drafted by this desperate coalition of international judges, sociologists, tech defectors. It's a speculative blueprint for how nations might govern advanced, deeply persuasive systems.
Especially in a world where people fundamentally disagree about reality itself.
Yes.
And so our mission today for this deep dive is to take Grant's fictional charter and use it as an ethical stress test for the very real Meta trial. We're going to explore how a piece of world-building fiction might actually offer the precise vocabulary and the solutions we desperately need for our actual crisis of technological governance.
It's a really profound exercise, and it makes perfect sense when you consider, the sheer pace of technological acceleration versus the pace of legislation.
Oh, it's a completely different speed.
Right. Our laws, by their very nature, are reactive. They're built to address harms that have already occurred. And they try to stuff these unprecedented new problems into legal paradigms from the past.
Like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly. But the Universal Charter on Human Alignment, because it's a piece of fiction, was able to be designed proactively. It's not just about pointing a finger and identifying bad tech or bad content, which is basically all our current laws try to do.
Yeah.
It offers a comprehensive systemic framework for how humanity can align incredibly powerful, pervasive systems with shared values. It recognizes this fundamental truth that powerful, broad-reach, psychologically influential systems simply cannot be judged solely by whether or not they formally comply with outdated laws.
Or by, like, reading their carefully worded corporate PR statements.
Precisely.
Exactly. But before we can really apply this sci-fi charter, we need to thoroughly understand the physical battlefield first. We have to map out the real-world courtroom drama that's being tested against.
The baseline reality.
Right. Let's look at the true scope of this trial in Oakland. Like I mentioned, it's a 29-state multi-district litigation. Just mechanically, that means you have 29 different state governments who looked at the data in their respective jurisdictions.
And they realized the alleged harms were just so widespread.
Widespread and incredibly consistent across state lines, to the point that they had to combine forces. And the core allegations are staggering. The states aren't simply saying that bad things occasionally happen to kids who use Facebook and Instagram.
No, they're going much further than that.
They are alleging that Meta intentionally designed these platforms, literally from the ground up, to encourage compulsive, addictive use by minors.
And furthermore, they're claiming that Meta actively, knowingly deceived the public and regulators about those safety risks for years.
Which is a huge claim.
It is.
Yeah.
And we have to be very precise about Meta's defense here because they aren't just sitting there taking this.
Of course not.
Meta maintains that its past statements regarding youth safety were completely accurate based on the data they had at the time. They point directly to their formal policies, which explicitly dictate the removal of underage users whenever they are officially identified by the system.
Right. They say, look at our terms of service. We kick kids off when we find them.
Exactly. But historically, the ultimate armor for Meta, and really for any major social media platform operating in the United States, has been Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act.
Ah, Section 230. The shield.
The bedrock law, written way back in 1996. It essentially says an interactive computer service cannot be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider.
Which, in plain English, means a platform cannot be held legally responsible for the content that its users post.
Right. It has been an impenetrable shield for 3 decades, protecting these tech companies from endless defamation and liability suits.
Which naturally raises a massive question for me. If Meta has Section 230 to protect them from what users post, how is this trial even happening?
That's the big question.
Right. How did 29 states manage to get this massive $200 billion lawsuit this far into the federal court system if the law explicitly says the platform isn't liable? I mean, 1996 was the era of dial-up internet and static bulletin boards. How does that law interact with modern algorithms?
That is the exact tension,
Right.
and it's the pivotal shift in this litigation. It's why this trial is so deeply historic. The judge overseeing this multi-district litigation, U.S. District Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers, has made a highly critical, surgically precise narrowing of Section 230's application in this specific trial.
Okay, break that down for me.
She ruled that, yes, Section 230 protects platforms from liability arising from third-party content. However, she is allowing the state's claims to proceed because they are not primarily about the third-party content itself.
Interesting. So it's not about what the users are saying to each other?
Exactly. The states aren't suing Meta because user A posted something harmful and user B read it. They're suing Meta based on Meta's own alleged deceptive statements to the public, and crucially, Meta's own platform design choices.
Platform design choices.
Yes, the legal framework is shifting entirely from content liability to design liability. It's a fundamental reframing of what a platform actually is. It's moving from viewing the platform as a passive bulletin board to viewing it as an active engineered environment.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, it's not about the poster tacked onto the bulletin board. It's about the fact that the bulletin board itself was allegedly designed with, like, flashing lights and subliminal messaging to hypnotize you so you physically cannot stop staring at it.
That is a very accurate way to conceptualize the legal shift.
Wow. And it's vital to remember that Meta is not walking into this Oakland courtroom undefeated.
No, they are not.
They're entering this trial heavily bruised from recent, highly damaging legal encounters. They recently lost a landmark social media addiction jury trial down in Los Angeles.
And we need to look at that for a second, because a jury trial means ordinary citizens were sitting in a jury box looking at internal company slide decks.
Right.
They were looking at the data on dopamine loops, internal metrics, and they found the company liable.
And on top of that, just prior to this Oakland trial, Meta was ordered by a New Mexico court to pay nearly $950 million in penalties and abatements.
Just shy of $1 billion.
Yeah. And that was specifically related to the extraction of data and the harming of young users in that state.
Those recent defeats, the LA jury verdicts, and the massive New Mexico penalty, those are massive warning signs for the company, its board of directors, and its shareholders.
I mean, how could they not be?
Right. While Meta remains a highly profitable, globally dominant entity, a cascade of multi-million-dollar legal defeats, particularly ones that piece the Section 230 shield by focusing on design and data extraction, that begins to chip away at the foundational business model.
Definitely.
But more importantly, if the plaintiffs in this Oakland trial are successful, it goes far beyond financial penalties. It threatens the company's core long-term growth metrics.
Because they want operational overhauls.
Exactly. The plaintiffs in Oakland are demanding massive structural changes. They want strict default privacy protections for minors. They want mandatory independent age assurance audits that the company cannot control.
Wow.
And most aggressively, they want the total removal of engagement-based algorithmic recommendations for users under a certain age.
If that happens, it doesn't just change Meta. It forces an industry-wide pivot.
The entire tech ecosystem would have to shift its foundational metric. They'd have to go from prioritizing maximum user retention to prioritizing legally mandated user well-being.
That is a seismic shift, and it means we have to really think deeply about what the phrase design liability actually implies in the real world.
Yes.
Judging a platform's design requires a completely new way of thinking about how technology interfaces with the human brain. We are no longer talking about regulating text on a screen. We are talking about regulating the mechanics of human attention.
It's behavioral engineering.
Exactly. And I feel like that realization is exactly what forces us to look beyond our current laws and leads us directly to the first major pillar of John Grant's speculative charter.
Honestly, when I was reading the source essay, this was the concept that blew my mind the most.
I think I know which one you're talking about. You're referring to Provision 2.2 of the Universal Charter on Human Alignment? Cognitive sovereignty. Yes, cognitive sovereignty. Explain what that actually means in the context of the sci-fi story and how it applies here.
In Grant's fiction, following the global crisis caused by algorithmic manipulation, the drafters of the charter realized that human beings needed a legally protected boundary around their own minds.
A boundary around their minds.
Right. Cognitive sovereignty dictates the absolute freedom from covert algorithmic influence. The charter explicitly states that any system operator must disclose exactly what their system infers about a user's internal mental state.
Okay.
And crucially, they must provide a mechanism allowing the user to view, understand, and contest those inferences.
I just want to pause and ask you, the listener, to really think about what that actually means for your daily life. Freedom from covert algorithmic influence. Think about how you interact with your phone right now.
Every single day.
You open an app, you scroll, you pause, you swipe. Right now, we mostly think of that as us just consuming content. But if we apply cognitive sovereignty to the allegations against Meta in the Oakland trial, the allegations that they are deliberately maximizing engagement and designing for compulsive use, we see a direct head-on collision.
A total violation of that sovereignty.
Let me try an analogy here to paint the picture. Imagine walking into a casino. We all know casinos are designed to keep you playing, right? There are no clocks, there are no windows.
Free drinks.
Right, free drinks. But imagine a future casino where the very architecture of the building is dynamically shifting around you in real time.
Okay, that's a terrifying thought.
Right. The color of the slot machine lights, the tempo of the background music, the physical placement of the exit doors, they all subtly shift based on a live feed of your heart rate, the dilation of your pupils, the micro-hesitations in your step as you walk down the aisle.
It adapts to you.
Exactly. The entire environment is invisibly engineered to adapt to your specific biological and psychological vulnerabilities to ensure you never, ever leave. And you have absolutely no idea it's happening. You just think, hey, I'm deciding to stay for one more game.
That is an excellent analogy because it really highlights the asymmetry of information and the invisible nature of the manipulation. What's fascinating here is that the charter treats this kind of algorithmic influence as a tangible, actionable, cognitive harm.
Not just a clever business strategy.
Exactly. In our current real-world legal system, the algorithms that drive engagement, these complex machine learning models that decide what video you see next, they're heavily protected.
They're trade secrets, right?
Yes. They are classified as commercial trade secrets. They're the proprietary special sauce of the platform, heavily guarded by intellectual property law. But the charter flips that entirely. It argues that if a platform is inferring your psychological state, If it's mapping your attentional fragility, your behavioral vulnerabilities, your specific moments of sadness, insecurity, or outrage, it is moving beyond mere content delivery.
It becomes something else.
It's exercising a form of cognitive control. And therefore, the Charter demands audit rights over those specific influence mechanisms.
Yeah.
It asserts that you, as a human being, have a sovereign right over your own cognitive processes, and no corporation has the right to quietly hack them for profit.
But how does that actually work mechanically? I mean, an app doesn't have a heart rate monitor attached to my chest. How is it inferring my psychological state? How do we move from the sci-fi casino concept to the reality of the Oakland trial?
It works through the staggering aggregation of micro behaviors. The platform doesn't need a heart rate monitor.
Right.
It measures the exact millisecond duration of your pauses as you scroll past an image. It measures the velocity of your swiping. It correlates the time of day you are active with historical data from millions of other users.
Okay, so it's looking at the tiny details.
Tiny details. For example, if you linger on a post about loneliness for 1.2 seconds longer than your average scroll speed, and it's 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, the back-end predictive model correlates that minute hesitation with a massive data set of similar users.
Wow.
It infers a state of vulnerability or an emotional low. It then routes that inferred data point into a retention model, which immediately floods your subsequent feed with parasocial content.
Parasocial content, like what?
Videos of people talking directly to the camera, content designed to simulate intimacy or maybe spark outrage, precisely because the data shows that users in that inferred emotional state are highly susceptible to remaining on the platform if fed that specific type of content.
So it's literally taking a micro hesitation, turning it into a vulnerability tag, and feeding me a customized reality to exploit that tag.
That's exactly the mechanism being alleged.
I mean, think about your own scrolling habits for a second. Think about those nights where you meant to look at your phone for 5 minutes to check a message, and suddenly an hour and a half has vanished into the void.
We've all been there.
Right. What if you had a legal right to know exactly what the algorithm inferred about your psychological vulnerabilities in that exact moment? What if you could click a button on your settings page and see a log that said, at 11:32 p.m., the system noticed a 1.5-second deceleration on a video about body image. It inferred a spike in insecurity, so it served you 45 consecutive videos, precisely calibrated to keep you in that emotional state, because our metrics show insecurity maximizes your attention time by 22%.
Chilling when you put it like that.
It is. But if Meta's design choices are found by this court in Oakland to have deliberately built and utilized these kinds of mechanisms to amplify compulsive use, well, that is the exact covert influence the Charter warns against.
And this is where the Oakland trial becomes a practical forcing function for this sci-fi concept. The 29 states are essentially demanding what the Charter calls for: radical transparency about recommendation logic.
They want to see under the hood.
They want forced disclosure of these engagement-maximizing design choices. They're asking the federal court to legally recognize that using inferred emotional states to drive addictive behavior is a violation of the user.
A cognitive injury.
Yes. The trial is testing whether algorithmic influence can be legally recognized not just as a sharp, highly optimized business practice, but as a demonstrable cognitive injury.
Okay, so if we establish that these algorithms are allegedly engaging in covert cognitive influence, the immediate glaring question becomes, whose minds are being targeted?
The demographics.
Right. Who is on the receiving end of this hyper-optimized architecture? And this brings us to what is undoubtedly the most emotionally charged, legally fraught, and heavily debated aspect of the entire Oakland trial.
The most vulnerable users.
The children.
Yeah.
Specifically children under the age of 13. Because you can argue about adult agency all day long, but when you apply this technology to a developing brain, the conversation changes entirely.
It fundamentally changes. And this takes us to the next vital provisions in the speculative charter. These focus on human dignity, the fundamental categorization of human beings within a system, and the acknowledgement of suffering.
Okay, break those down.
Specifically, we are looking at Charter Provision 2.1, the dignity floor. The dignity floor states, unequivocally and without exception, that no person may be reduced to a mere score, a risk rating, or a predictive metric.
Zero exceptions.
Zero. And inherently coupled with that is Provision 2.6. Suffering acknowledgement. This provision dictates that no system may be built that treats a being capable of suffering as if it were not.
So a system cannot pretend that a suffering user is merely choosing freely in a vacuum when the environment itself is aggressively shaping that choice.
Exactly.
And this is where the details of the Oakland trial get incredibly dark and frankly deeply frustrating to read about. A massive part of the state's legal strategy revolves around an existing law called COPPA.
The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act.
Right. This is a law from 1998 designed to protect kids online. The states are alleging that Meta knowingly collected data from millions of children under 13 without obtaining the required parental consent.
Which is a clear violation, if proven.
Right. But here is the part of the source material that legitimately stopped me in my tracks. The states allege that Meta purposefully ignored the massive presence of these kids on their platforms because, mechanically, the COPPA law actually incentivizes not knowing.
Yes, the perverse incentive.
Wait. How is that possible? How does a law designed to protect children incentivize ignoring them? Explain the mechanics of that to me because it sounds crazy.
It does sound crazy, but it's a classic example of a static law creating a perverse incentive in a dynamic technological environment. COPPA imposes incredibly strict, massive financial penalties for knowingly collecting data from children under 13 without explicit parental consent.
Okay, so knowingly is the key word.
Exactly. Because the liability only triggers upon knowing that the user is a child, a perverse structural incentive emerges for the platform operators.
Ah, I see where this is going.
If a company does not implement robust, foolproof age verification during the sign-up process, if they intentionally design their back-end architecture to maintain a state of willful ignorance about the true age of their users, they can legally argue they did not knowingly violate the COPPA statute.
Let me make sure I am grasping the reality of this. Are you saying they designed the back-end data architecture to deliberately strip away or ignore age-identifying metadata so that their legal department can maintain plausible deniability?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
The allegation is that the platform's predictive algorithms are sophisticated enough to infer your emotional state from a micro-hesitation, right?
Right, we just established that.
Meaning they absolutely possess the capability to accurately infer if a user's behavioral patterns match those of an 11-year-old rather than a
Well, that's
25-year-old.
what they do. They know everything else.
But the system is allegedly designed to not formalize that inference into an official age tag on the user's profile. They maintain willful ignorance, avoiding the legal liability of COPPA, while their engagement metrics, their ad revenue, and their overall growth numbers massively benefit from the very real, very active presence of those younger demographics on the platform.
That is structural madness. The actual literal law that was written by Congress to protect children actually rewards a multi-billion-dollar tech giant for purposefully designing systems that turn a blind eye to millions of kids being harvested for attention.
They have a massive loophole.
How does a framework like the fictional charter even begin to address a perverse incentive that deeply entrenched in our legal system?
It fixes it by completely removing the loophole of willful ignorance through the application of the dignity floor.
Okay, how so?
Under the Charter's framework, treating the presence of children as a legal risk to be minimized via ignorance, or viewing them merely as an invisible engagement opportunity, is a fundamental violation of human alignment. The Charter demands that platforms must conceptualize their users as human beings to be protected, not as legal exceptions to be managed or null data points to be harvested.
But you can't just pretend they don't exist.
No. If an age estimation system is designed to deliberately look the other way, it is reducing those human children to invisible retention metrics. The dignity floor says you cannot do that. You cannot reduce a human being to a null value just to avoid a fine.
It is the profound difference between a corporate compliance department asking, how do we engineer our data flow to avoid a COPPA fine, versus asking, how do we actually protect the 10-year-old child who's currently using our app?
Exactly. The focus shifts entirely.
And that brings in Provision 2.6, the suffering acknowledgement. Because the standard defense from tech companies, whenever the topic of algorithmic addiction, body image issues, or youth mental health is brought up in hearings or in the press, it's almost always an appeal to personal responsibility. They say, well, we provide the connection tools, we provide screen time limits in the settings menu, but ultimately it is about user choice. The user chooses to download the app, the user chooses to open it, the user chooses to keep scrolling.
which is an entirely hollow, bad faith defense if the choice environment has been meticulously engineered against the user's best interests.
Yes.
This is exactly what the suffering acknowledgement addresses. The multi-district trial alleges that these platforms were designed in ways that explicitly harmed young users, causing measurable increases in anxiety, depression, and compulsive use.
Real-world harm.
The charter states that if a system operator knows, or statistically should know, that its architecture produces compulsive, harmful behavior, it cannot legally or ethically hide behind the fantasy of independent user choice.
It's like, well, you've got an analogy for this.
Yeah, if you design a maze for a rat, and you engineer that maze to be physically impossible to navigate without the rat experiencing despair and exhaustion, you cannot then blame the rat for feeling despair. You must acknowledge the suffering that your design inherently generates.
I love that framing. You cannot engineer a psychologically manipulative environment, profit billions of dollars off the friction of that manipulation, and then shrug your shoulders and say, well, they chose to be manipulated.
It legally and ethically nullifies the individual responsibility argument when the game is rigged at the source code level.
But this brings up a huge, glaring operational problem for me.
What's that?
If the charter demands that we stop treating users as data points, and it demands that companies stop pretending engineered addiction is just a matter of user choice, what does a company actually have to do to prove they are safe?
That's the million-dollar question, or the $200 billion question.
Right, because it is easy to write high-minded ethical theories about dignity in a sci-fi novel. How do you move from that to actual operational transparency in the real world? How do you enforce it?
That transition from theoretical ethics to rigorous operational practice is exactly where the Charter introduces some of its most radical and demanding provisions.
Okay, let's hear them.
We move into Charter Provision 2.7, Counterfactual Honesty. This provision dictates that any new data-driven policy or algorithmic architecture must be published beside a workable non-surveillance alternative.
Wait, publish the alternative?
Yes. And we also must consider Provision 2.3, Reality Calibration, which establishes a fundamental right to traceable provenance for any consequential communications.
Traceable provenance.
This essentially treats corporate safety claims not as PR, but as statements of fact that must be independently verified against reality.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on counterfactual honesty first, because that sounds completely unfeasible in a capitalist reality. Demanding a company build an entirely parallel, non-addictive version of Facebook just to prove it can be done.
It's a high bar, certainly.
Let me try an analogy here, because I'm struggling with the mechanics of this one. Yeah. It's like looking at a massive supermarket chain. The supermarket is obviously designed to maximize profit.
Right.
They put the essential items like the milk, the eggs, the bread at the very back of the store, forcing you to walk past thousands of highly processed, high-margin junk food items.
Standard layout.
And they put the candy right at eye level in the checkout aisle where your kids will grab it while you are distracted paying. It is choice architecture designed for extraction.
Absolutely.
So under current standards, if someone sues the supermarket for contributing to public health crises, the supermarket says, hey, we sell food, people choose what to put in their carts. Is counterfactual honesty demanding that the supermarket legally prove they could still make a profit if they redesign the entire floor plan to put the nutritious food at the front and remove the candy from the checkout?
That is a phenomenal analogy, and the answer is yes.
Seriously.
Counterfactual honesty demands exactly that.
Exactly.
It says it is not enough for the supermarket to simply add a warning label to the candy aisle. They must physically show the floor plan of the alternative. They must show the math. They have to prove that a viable business model exists that does not rely fundamentally on exploiting the vulnerability of the shopper. Applied to the meta trial, the states aren't just asking for slightly better content moderation or a new warning pop-up.
They're asking for a massive operational overhaul.
Yes.
So, applied to the tech world, the charter-informed challenge to Meta wouldn't just be, hey, hire more moderators to remove the bad posts faster. It would be, show us a workable algorithmic design that does not depend on addictive engagement loops to generate revenue.
Show us the alternative.
Show us a version of Facebook or Instagram that does not rely on mass profiling or the willful ignorance of minors. The company would literally have to publish and justify the counterfactual code.
Exactly.
They would have to answer the question, what would this multi-billion-dollar service look like if it was not optimized for compulsive retention?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And they would have to prove that the counterfactual alternative was considered and rejected, which opens up a massive avenue for determining liability.
But think about the sheer weight of that requirement for a moment. Demanding that a tech company physically prove their platform could exist in a less intrusive, less surveillant form. Right now, society just takes their word for it.
We do. We completely trust them on that.
When Congress hauls a CEO in for a hearing, the CEO says that this is the only way the product works to remain free. Or, if we change the algorithm to stop tracking behavior, the whole user experience collapses and the company fails.
And we just accept that as a law of nature.
Right. The charter says, prove it. Show us the blueprints for the alternative. Show us the underlying math. It forces the company to legally admit that their current, allegedly harmful architecture is a deliberate, calculated business choice, not a technological inevitability.
And this ties directly into the concept of reality calibration.
Okay, reality calibration. Let's get into that.
In the Oakland trial, the advisory jury will evaluate 51 specific alleged misrepresentations made by Meta executives over the years,
51 statements.
including numerous statements by CEO Mark Zuckerberg. The trial is not just about what the platform code did. It is heavily focused on what the company said it was doing. What did they conceal internally? What did they misrepresent to the public, to parents, and to federal regulators about the safety of their products?
Because right now, corporate safety claims are essentially treated as public relations. They are marketing copy. A company issues a press release that says, "We care deeply about your safety. Your privacy is our top priority. We have industry-leading tools."
Empty words.
And we all kind of roll our eyes because we know it's just lawyer-approved jargon.
But under the Charter's reality calibration, those statements are no longer protected as mere PR puffery. They are legally classified as consequential communications.
Consequential communications, meaning they have legal weight.
Yes. If a CEO sits before Congress, or if a company issues a formal public statement telling regulators that a platform is safe for kids, that statement must have traceable provenance.
Meaning they have to back it up with data.
It must be scientifically verifiable and subject to independent, rigorous review by what the Charter refers to as a licensed source verifier.
That's fascinating.
The advisory jury in the Oakland trial is essentially serving as a real-world analog to this concept of independent calibrators. They're going to look at those 51 statements and test whether Meta's public assertions of safety were traceable to the internal reality of their data, their private emails, and their actual design choices.
So if Mark Zuckerberg issues a press release saying, "We have robust tools to prevent addiction and protect teen mental health," the jury's going to look at the internal Slack messages, the internal design documents, the secret slide decks.
And compare the two.
Right, and ask, does this public statement align with the reality of what your engineers were building that week? Or was it a consequential misrepresentation designed to delay regulation?
It elevates a standard press release into a legally binding statement of scientific fact.
That's huge. But when I look at all of this, the counterfactual honesty, the reality calibration, the cognitive sovereignty, I hit another wall.
What's the wall?
This level of deep, systemic, real-time transparency requires an entirely new way of enforcing the law. You cannot manage this level of algorithmic auditing with our current, incredibly slow-moving, politically gridlocked bureaucracy.
Which pulls us back to the macro level.
Right. Why do we even need to be discussing a sci-fi charter? Because as this trial painfully demonstrates, our current framework of static laws is fundamentally broken when facing modern adaptive technology.
Which brings us to the operational architecture of the Charter itself. The author, John Grant, understood that a list of moral aspirations is useless without an engine to drive it.
You need an engine.
The Charter has what is called an operational shell, designed specifically for adaptive governance. It recognizes that static regulation, like the COPPA statute written in the early days of the Internet, is entirely insufficient for governing rapidly evolving, psychologically influential machine learning systems.
Okay, let's break down this operational shell. What are the parts?
The operational shell includes several key mechanisms: a 4-tier capability classification system, a mandatory 6-year revision cycle, a global review body focused on public accountability, and a reservations registry.
Let's break those down because this is how we actually govern the future. Let's start with the 4-tier capability classification. This grades systems based on their reach and the reversibility of their impact.
Exactly.
So a 2I system is something with a narrow scope and low consequence, maybe a local restaurant's reservation algorithm.
Right, very localized.
But a Tier 4 system has a massive global scope, and its effects are effectively irreversible on a societal level. Meta, with billions of active users globally, including millions of developing miners where habits and continuous data extraction have long-term psychological effects.
It is undeniably operating a Tier 3 or Tier 4 system.
And this introduces the crucial concept of asymmetric stakes. The Charter argues that regulatory obligations must scale exponentially with a system's power and reach. You cannot regulate a globally dominant, psychologically influential machine like Meta with the same light-touch, hands-off framework you use for a local Tier I tech startup.
You just can't. The deeper the reach into the human psyche and the more irreversible the potential harm to a generation, the heavier and more intrusive the mandatory audit must be.
That makes perfect sense.
That is why the plaintiffs in Oakland demanding $200 billion in penalties and massive structural operational overhauls makes logical sense under the Charter. The accountability burden must match the system's tier.
I agree with the scaling of obligations, but let me push back on one aspect of this operational shell because this is where the sci-fi aspect feels a bit naive to me.
Okay, hit me.
The Charter proposes a review body at the United Nations level to oversee all of this, but it explicitly says this body has no direct enforcement power. It can't send in the police. It relies entirely on public review, published findings, and public accountability. It is basically a global name and shame model.
It is a naming and shaming model, yes.
In the real world, do companies with hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue actually care if they are publicly shamed by a UN committee? Does a strongly worded report from a review body actually force a company like Meta, driven by quarterly earnings, to change its core business model?
It's a very valid skepticism. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of what is happening in the Oakland trial right now, the answer is demonstrably yes.
Really? How so?
The trial itself is functioning as a massive, high-stakes public review mechanism. The 29 states are acting as the public investigators. The jury will evaluate findings publicly. The executives are personally named, and their private communications are being entered into the public record.
Okay, I'm starting to see your point.
Even without the Charter's formal review body, the reputational and financial stakes of public exposure are enormous. A public finding of liability, the forced exposure of internal documents showing they knew the harm they were causing but chose profit anyway, that directly damages investor confidence.
Which hits the bottom line.
Exactly. It destroys public trust, which degrades user growth over time. And crucially, it sets an industry-wide legal precedent that opens the floodgates for further litigation. The trial demonstrates that public review, when backed by the threat of immense financial penalty and the raw exposure of internal hypocrisy, does profound systemic work.
It pierces the corporate veil.
It pierces the corporate veil.
Okay, I see that. The exposure of the internal communications, the Slack messages where engineers admit the algorithm is hurting kids, that is often more damaging than the fine itself. It shatters the carefully constructed public narrative that the company is just a benign connector of people.
Absolutely.
But what about the laws themselves? You mentioned earlier that COPPA is an older law. This brings up the Charter's 6-year revision cycle.
Yes. The Charter fundamentally acknowledges that technology will always outpace the legislative process. Always. Therefore, relying on static compliance to old laws is a trap.
It's a losing game.
The Charter is provisional by design. It explicitly demands a full, mandatory rewrite of the governance rules every 6 years to ensure they are keeping pace with technological reality.
That makes sense.
We are currently trying to regulate Tier 4 algorithmic systems capable of real-time behavioral modification using statutes written before the smartphone was even invented.
Before the concept of a feed even existed.
Right. The Oakland trial, with lawyers arguing over the definition of knowing under a 1998 law, is a painful, absurd demonstration of why a mandatory 6-year revision cycle is absolutely necessary.
It is like trying to regulate a fleet of autonomous supersonic delivery drones using maritime laws written for wooden sailing ships in the 1800s. The vocabulary just doesn't map onto the reality of the technology.
That's a great way to put it.
And there's one more concept in the operational shell that really resonated with me, and I want to connect it directly to the listener. It is temporal reciprocity, which is provision 2.8.
Yes, temporal reciprocity. This establishes that our ethical and legal obligations run across time. We must actively protect future generations and respect the interests of those already gone.
Across time. So, applied to the Meta trial, the harms being alleged by the states are not just one-time transactional harms.
Right. If you buy a defective toaster and it breaks, that is a transactional harm. You return it, you get your money back, it's over.
The states are alleging long-term compounding developmental and ecological harms. Children learn baseline behavioral patterns on these platforms early in life. Their dopamine and attention systems are actively shaped during critical, irreplaceable developmental windows.
The data collected from them when they are 11 follows them into adulthood, shaping their economic and social opportunities forever.
The design norms established by Meta today become the unthinking, invisible defaults for the entirety of the next generation of users. I want you, the listener, to think about your own digital habits again. Think about the way you naturally swipe down to refresh a feed.
It's muscle memory.
Right. That was a design choice implemented over a decade ago, modeled literally on a slot machine pole, and now it is hardwired into your muscle memory. You are acting on defaults installed by platforms years ago.
So the charter is saying if your multi-billion-dollar business model depends on building long-term, hardwired cognitive habits in young people, you owe them infinitely more than just a short-term, easily bypassed, click accept consent box.
You have an intergenerational obligation not to pollute their cognitive development.
Exactly. It treats human alignment as an ongoing, profound intergenerational duty, not a momentary legal checklist to be cleared by the compliance department.
Wow. So what does this all mean? We have gone on quite an intense journey today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started in a tense federal courtroom in Oakland, looking at a historic coalition of 29 states taking on Meta for allegedly designing platforms to intentionally addict children and deliberately deceiving the public about.
The biggest tech trial of the decade.
And we have used John Grant's speculative universal charter on human alignment from his story 6 Days in May to understand the true, terrifying depth of what is actually on trial here. We have seen how the concept of cognitive sovereignty reveals the invisible danger of algorithmic influence mapping our micro-hesitations.
The casino shifting around you.
Right. We have seen how the dignity floor exposes the moral failure of static laws like COPPA that actually incentivize willful ignorance. And we have explored why we desperately need adaptive governance, like a 6-year revision cycle and counterfactual honesty, instead of relying on outdated regulations. Grant's science fiction has honestly provided the clearest, most vital lens for understanding our reality.
It proves that sometimes, when the real world changes too fast for our traditional institutions to comprehend, we need the speculative imagination to give us the vocabulary required to name the entirely new paradigms we are living within.
I couldn't agree more.
The Charter gives us a framework to demand counterfactual honesty, to demand that human beings are never treated merely as data points to be extracted, and to recognize that invisible cognitive influence is a legitimate, actionable harm that must be regulated.
And speaking of vocabulary, there's one final brilliant concept from the Charter I want to leave you with. It is Provision 2.5, the cross-block vocabulary.
Oh, this is a really important one.
In the fiction, the Charter suggests that to solve these massive global issues, humanity needs a translation table for rival terms. We have to map heavily loaded corporate-approved words like engagement, retention, and optimization against clinical words like addiction and manipulation.
To find a shared, truly neutral concept of what is happening?
Exactly. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. As you pull your phone out of your pocket in the elevator, or while waiting in line at the grocery store.
We all do it.
If you were forced to create a completely neutral word for the way you interact with your phone right now, not a sanitized corporate word like engagement, and not a clinical pathologized word like addiction, what would that word be?
What is the true, honest name for that relationship?
And if a black box algorithm knows that word and understands the depths of that relationship better and earlier than you do, who is really in control?